Joining this advanced CTE webinar, Building the Pipeline of Diverse Educators. This session is one of many in a series of advanced CTE webinars to support you in learning more about the cutting edge and innovative work we're seeing related to CTE across the country. This session will be recorded and shared on Advanced CTE's website for your reference. Should you have any questions at any time, we encourage you to submit them via the Q&A box on your screen. You are also welcome to contribute to the conversation by typing into the chat box. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Today, we are discussing a critical issue that impacts all of education and student success, and specifically CTE. As educator shortages are on the rise, finding ways to increase the racial and cultural diversity of our educator workforce has become more challenging. According to recent federal data, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, make up roughly 37% of the adult population and 50% of children birthed to age 18 in the United States. However, BIPOC teachers make up just 19% of the nation's public school teaching workforce. While representation has increased, both in secondary and post-secondary education, there is no easy way to diversify the educator workforce quickly. We will have to address the issue in a number of ways because we know that creating greater alignment between educators and the learners they teach has a significant impact on creating a more equitable system where each learner feels welcome in, is supported by, and has the means to succeed in the career preparation ecosystem. Our very first panelist, Dr. Joshua P. Starr, has been the Chief Executive Officer of PDK International since July 2015. Since then, PDK has relocated its headquarters to Arlington, Virginia, and celebrated more than 50 years of the PDK poll, 100 years of the Kaplan magazine. Under Dr. Starr, PDK has launched Educators Rising across the nation, the first national CTE program that puts high school students on the path to becoming teachers. Educators Rising is addressing the nation's teacher shortage while diversifying the profession through its high school chapters, curriculum, micro-credentials, and competitions. Dr. Starr, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us why your organization has invested in solving this critical issue and what steps state leaders can take to increase educator diversity. Dr. Starr?
Well, thank you so much, Nithya, and it's great to be with everybody today. And it's just always a pleasure to talk with others who are doing this work and share the work that we've been doing at Educators Rising. And I am going to talk about it in a couple ways. I'm going to share specifically kind of aspects of our program that are really leading to sort of bending the arc, as we say. But I also I'll be weaving in a couple other things that I think speak to this larger issue of how we need to address both pipelines and retention issues based on some of my previous experience. So. And I also, and as we get started, I think what's really important, so Educators Rising, as I'll be sharing with you, it's really about three things, right? One is the teacher shortage, right? Inspiring young people to become educators. Two is diversifying the profession in that we want to make sure our educators reflect the demographics of their community. And the third is excellence, right? We need to make sure that every single one of our children, every single one of our young people has a great teacher before them. So those are the three things we're trying to do in Educators Rising. So let's start going through the slides, and I'll share this with you. And all this information is also on our website if you just go to educatorsrising.org. So we are all around the country right now. We have 31 official state affiliates. We have a presence everywhere. When you come to our conference in June, you meet kids and teachers from around the country who are doing this work. And it's just a great community of folks who are all tackling this issue. Go to the next one. We actually, so just a little bit of history. Educators Rising is the former Future Educators of America, which was established by the NEA back in 1937. With support from the NEA, AFT, and National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, we launched Educators Rising back in 2016, and then we launched our academy, our curriculum, and our micro-credentials about 4 years or 5 years ago in 2017. We put out our blueprint, which is available on our website, which is a great planning document. couple years ago, and now we just launched a new program called Teaching Fundamentals, which is kind of an introductory program for folks who want to get started. You can go to the next slide. Our standards are really important to us, and for those of you who are familiar with National Board of Professional Teaching Standards, we use their process to develop our standards. And again, this isn't just about getting kids to become educators. This is about getting young people to become awesome educators and future leaders, right? And the kind of educators that our kids deserve. So these are the standards, right? To just kind of show how we introduce people to the profession. I'm not going to read these. I know you all can take a look. And again, it's all on our website, but we want to make sure they have a comprehensive view. And if you go to the next one, I am certainly not going to read this messy slide to you when I say messy, but this shows the curriculum. Like, we're very, very deliberate about how we introduce young people to the profession. And we have a really clear curriculum map, which we can send to you. And we want to make sure at the local level that it aligns to your state curriculum, that aligns to your state standards, and there are opportunities for people at the local level to do that. You go to the next one. And then we have cross-cutting themes. And one of the things that's really important about these themes, which you will find in every single one of our units, is that we know that many people are attracted to Educators Rising because of these themes, right? They may have their own homegrown program, but they don't do anything around social justice and advocacy. They may have their own homegrown program that doesn't do anything around anti-bias instruction, cultural competency, etc. And it's important as we think about diversifying the profession, it's important that we are ensuring that the message we're sending our kids is that these things are important to us, right? And they are important, you know, in order to be a teacher, you need to know how to value and interact with people from all different backgrounds and all different parts of the community. So we deeply embed it into the work we do. Next. We also have national competitions. Again, some really wonderful opportunities for kids to compete. Some of you may be seeing the state competitions that are going on right now. And then of course we have our national. If you go to the next one. Our conference this summer is in June in DC. I always invite people who want people to come. Go to the next one. But then, and then one other thing we do, or a couple of things we do, is our clinical experiences, right? So the way Educators Rising works is we recruit kids typically sophomore or junior year. Some schools are even doing as early as middle school. And they are recruited in typically by a teacher who respects them and values them and says, hey, taps them on the shoulder and says, hey, Josh, you ever think about becoming a teacher? And once they go through the curriculum for a year, although some schools do modify that to a certain extent, they then do a clinical supervision where they're also they're having an experience with a teacher who is someone they respect and value. And oftentimes it's someone who looks like them. And the great aspect of that is that it becomes relational, right? Because many kids, like about half of our kids, have always wanted to be teachers for whatever reason. Oftentimes, you know, they were greatly affected by a teacher themselves. They had a sibling who was. They really see teaching as a great way to serve. But half our kids, they were more like me, frankly. You know, may not have thought about teaching as a career, but want to, you know, serve the community, want to do something in public service, have a social justice orientation. And when someone they respects taps them on the shoulder and recruits them in, they say, oh, you know, maybe I'll check this out. And then during the clinical experience where they have an opportunity to actually serve kids in their own community, that they get that you know, buzz, that bug you get for teaching, and that's when the light bulbs go off. So it's a critically important part of their experience. You can go to the next one. You can see some of our impact, right? We're doing some more evaluations right now as we speak, because we have these great state partnerships in Connecticut and Arkansas and some others around the country, and we've been able to fund some more evaluations. But we're starting to see an impact in the perception that people have about the profession based on their experience in Educators Rising. Go to the next one. But we also know that there's a real need, right? So there has been a decrease in enrollment in teacher prep programs for the last, 12, 15 years or so. And according to our own poll data from a few years back, for the first time, a majority of Americans, I think it was 2018, said they didn't want their own children to become educators. And teachers who were surveyed said the same thing. But if you can go to the next one, We also know that there's this really compelling interest that we have to make sure that our kids have teachers who look like them. And I want to be clear here, right? So 77% of the teacher workforce is white women. 82% overall is white. And many, many of our white educators are working their butts off, excuse my language, every single day to serve our children of color. And many of them do a great job serving children of color. And children of color benefit when they have educators who look like them. And so we have to keep these two ideas in our head at the same time. There's distinct evidence. And if you go on our website, Travis Bristol, he did a special issue. Look at Dan Goldhaber's work. The evidence is out there that kids benefit from having a teacher who looks like them. And kids benefit from having a teacher who loves them, respects them, holds them to a high standard, supports them. And that teacher can be of any color. So we have to hold both those ideas in our head as we talk about the need to diversify the workforce. If you go to the next one. So just a couple more things about how we're going about doing it. Next slide, I think, do we have one more? Yeah, so we really look at this as a multi-pronged effort that requires both the, you have the course in high school, right? Then the idea is that you are going into your local institute of higher education. Hopefully there will be incentives. And we know that we need to create incentives at the collegiate level in order to make sure that our kids have what they need to enroll in an EPP, right, an educator prep program, or to go on to get certified, whether that's dual enrollment, whether that's changing some of the certification barriers, whether it's incentives like scholarships, right, whether it's counseling and mentoring. Those are the kinds of things that the higher ed institutions need to do to work with their K-12 institutions, say, we're getting these kids in, let's make sure they are being supported as they go into college. And then what you want to do is offer them employment when they go back in. So there's some districts out there, you graduate as a senior, you get a conditional letter of employment, right? And then when you come back 4 years later, 5 years later, you are, celebrated at the board meeting because you are now going to be a teacher in that district. Those are the kinds of things that we're seeing around the country that really help school districts diversify the profession. I think the next one. And then one other thing I'll mention is our blueprint, which is on our website, which kind of helps people really organize and plan. What's critically important here is stakeholder engagement. You have to have your teachers associations involved, your institutes of higher ed, your state departments are critically important, legislative bodies, foundations, right? Everyone needs to come together, and we put together the blueprint to help people plan. We're hopefully going to revise it this summer. I think I have one more slide that I'll end on. What's really important here also, and this isn't in the slides, but I just want to mention it for a moment, is that we are incredibly proud of the work we are doing around the pipeline, right? It is absolutely necessary to inspire young people to become educators. Oftentimes, all you have to do is ask, right? And oftentimes, if it's someone who they respect and it's someone they value, someone who they say, hey, that person's pretty cool, kids like to be asked to do stuff. But focusing on the pipeline is necessary. It's not sufficient, right? And I kind of go to my former experience as a superintendent of schools when we thought a lot about retention. We know that the retention of educators of color is half what it is for white educators, right? They leave at twice the rate. We know there aren't enough opportunities for career advancement for teachers in general, right? But particularly for teachers of color. There are all these kind of systematic things that schools need to do in order to ensure that our educators of color are well cared for and tended to. All educators must be well cared for and tended to. But we need to double down on that when it comes to retaining and respecting and valuing our educators of color so that our kids will then also see them, right? Because we don't want our kids to go into the same institutions that have been problematic for the teachers that exist. So the pipeline is incredibly important. lots of ways to diversify it, lots of ways to attract, different kinds of kids into it. But we have to think about both aspects of it, both the pipeline and the experience that our kids are having, our people are having, I should say, once they go into the profession. And I know a lot of other people are doing that work as well. And we're certainly glad to be in partnership with them. So with that, I'm going to stop. I think I'm turning it over to Brittany. And of course, I'll be happy to answer any questions as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Starr. I'll actually toggle to one quick question that you can answer that we got in the chat before we go to Dr. Williams. What perspectives or insights can be shared to ease of entry based on the licensing process? I don't think I'm reading that right, but basically I think it's a question about the licensing process for educators.
Yeah, I mean, we know that there are a lot of states now that are taking a look at praxis requirements. They're taking a look at certification at state portability for certification and things like that. And praxis certainly has there's a role there. We also know, you might want to take a look at things like how much does it cost, right? How many different hoops do you have to jump through? And who's bearing the burden of that, and how much help do people have to just fill out the paperwork, pay the money, all those kinds of things. And I know a lot of states are looking at it. There is, state departments love bureaucracy, school districts do too. They sort of thrive on it, but there are some simple ways of doing it, like just reducing some of the paperwork and cost requirements, allowing for both pension and certification portability, and then looking at praxis requirements, because we know that that's a really big issue out there. Those are some of the things.
Thank you, Dr. Starr. And we'll encourage you to continue to add questions as we go to our second panelist. Our second panelist is a native born of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Dr. Brittany Baptiste Williams is committed to strengthening the educational opportunities of students by assisting state leaders in both vision and scope. She earned her undergraduate degree from Louisiana State University and her graduate degrees from Southeastern Louisiana University and the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Dr. Williams has worked extensively with the Carl D. Perkins Grant at Baton Rouge Community College for 10 years before joining the Louisiana Community and Technical College system. As State Director for Career and Technical Education, her focus areas include compliance, equity, CTE program alignment, training, and partnerships. Dr. Williams, thank you so much for joining us today. We'd really love to hear from you about how the Louisiana team is tackling this issue of educator diversity as part of your state's strategic focus to ensure more equity for learners. Can you share your approach to addressing equity and educator diversity and shortages?
So I can, and thank you, Nithya, and thank you to Advanced CTE for allowing me the opportunity. So I will go ahead and just give you a little bit of information to ground our discussion on equity. If you'll advance to the next slide. So just a little bit of information about who we are. In Louisiana, we have a strategic vision for equity. And so we want to focus on equity and inclusion in order to prepare an educated and a skilled workforce to meet the needs of employers. And so to do this, we have 6 primary goals to accomplish it. So the first thing that we want to do is making sure that we support alignment of our CTE programs with the workforce needs of our communities, and making sure that we're keeping in mind those emerging and changing dynamics of the local economies. The second thing that we want to do is make sure that we're servicing the needs of the special populations to support equity and diversity in all of our programs of study. The third thing that we'd like to do is make sure that we incorporate a continuum of work-based learning and workforce preparation opportunities. Next, we want to make sure that we're collaborating with those stakeholders that Dr. Starr mentioned in order to develop and enhance our programs of study so that there are clear transitions from secondary to post-secondary to employment. The next thing that we want to do is make sure that we're supporting and expanding our essential employability skills for workforce readiness, And then lastly, we're supporting professional development to provide access to relevant education and workforce training and credentialing. You can advance. Thank you. So those were some big goals, 6 goals. So we have 4 main strategies to accomplish these. The first one is strong regional coalitions. So we have 8 regional coalitions within the state that are aligned to our regional labor market areas. They're grounded with effective and supported leadership, and they're maintained by actively engaged participants who are advancing the economic interest of their students and communities. So these coalitions include the required stakeholders under Perkins 5, but we also have some additional stakeholders that we set in from our state. So we also include adult education staff, the regional economic development organizations, representatives from corrections, foundation and financial partners, community leaders, and lastly, and most importantly, representatives of organizations focused on equity. So the second strategy that we use is high quality Perkins eligible CTE programs of study, making sure that they are in every school, college, and correctional facility so that our students, again, have a clear pathway from education to employment. And so our CTE programs of study make sure that they represent an experience that supports collaboration between all of our educational partners, that we're including secondary in obtaining or focusing on secondary to obtain their post-secondary credential, that we're allowing for multiple entry and exit points for students, that we're including some type of recruitment process that attracts students from special populations and those students that have traditionally been underrepresented. And then we also want to make sure that we're providing supportive services and resources to all of our students so that they can achieve success in our programs. The third strategy that we employ is partnerships at every level. So at the state and local levels, we're trying to leverage all of our different agencies to ensure that students from every community have access to pathways that lead to economic self-sufficiency. So these partnerships include our Louisiana Board of Regents, the Community and Technical College System, our Department of Education, the Workforce Commission, our Economic Development area, and also our Department of Public Safety and Corrections. So making sure that everyone is at the table will allow learners from various backgrounds to be represented and have their voices heard. And so the last strategy that we use is making sure that we have highly effective educators that are developed through recruitment and retention strategies and ongoing peer-to-peer collaboration, training, and credentialing opportunities. You can advance. So the reason why we focused on those strategies is because of the data, and it's very telling. According to the Lumina Foundation, Louisiana is improving educational attainment, but we're still lagging when compared to the national average. So our attainment rate is about 33% or 48% if you include short-term training credentials, and the state is still working toward an attainment goal of 60% by 2030. So you'll notice that there are significant gaps linked to race and ethnicity, particularly for the Black and Hispanic communities. Addressing these gaps with highly effective educators that reflect the demographics of the students is just one way we can help our students progress from education to employment. And Dr. Starr talked about how important it is for students to see themselves in their instructors, right? For them to have someone to talk to, for them to have someone who can relate to their barriers and their challenges, someone who could speak to their place in this world and society. And so one strategy that we're using to address equity in Louisiana is our diversity dashboard. You'll advance to the next slide. So LCTCS is composed of 12 community colleges, and we have individuals from very different races, ethnicities, nationalities, socioeconomic statuses, religious backgrounds, gender identities and expressions, and sexual orientations. So through data-driven recommendations, we've created a task force on diversity, equity, and inclusion to help facilitate the system's ongoing efforts to foster a culture of mutual respect, for all of our students, faculty, and staff, and to help attract, retain, and promote employees from all of these various backgrounds. So the task force works to enhance and improve and transform all of our experiences within LCTCS. And so this dashboard is an important tool that the task force uses, but they also share that information out to all of our stakeholders and regional partners, all of our affiliate institutions. And we're using this work with the dashboard to highlight CTE engagement to assist our local practitioners in identifying patterns of enrollment and participation at our institutions, as well as areas for further examination. And so we are continuing with the dashboard movement, as I see it, by expanding to a CTE dashboard, and we'll have additional elements that focus on all of those indicators needed under Perkins 5. So I just shared with you just a little bit of information about Louisiana to give you an idea of what we're doing. But I know we have a little bit more information that we can share on how we build that pipeline of educators. But my information is on the screen. You can also follow up with us through all of the social media platforms. Just use the hashtag GoLCTCS. And so, Nynthia, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Great presentation. And I think one of the things that was really great to hear what you shared is it's not a very singular strategy. The way you address this issue as a state is you look at a lot of different things and you really work collaboratively across the aisle to make sure that you're ultimately benefiting our learners. So thank you for those comments. We'll take a couple of questions. I see a question here from our audience. How could we ensure that people that come from the business world have a pathway that does not start them at the bottom? So I think they're talking about teaching and teaching credentials. So we can have both panelists answer this question. So I'll just open it up.
I mean, yeah, so I'll start. And I think it's frankly, pretty straightforward, right? You got, you can negotiate where you're going to put someone on a salary schedule, right? It's not cut and dry. And a district can say, yes, I'm going to honor their past experience. It goes back into the certification rules, right? I mean, just a lot of these things are they're not flexible. They're very old school and they're very traditional. And, I don't know, and I'm sure there are others that know of specific states that have done a good job of getting folks in from the business sector, career switchers and all that. But it's just looking at all those rules. Like, you got to sit down with all those different rules and policies that exist and go through them one by one and say, who's it serving, right? Who's it for? And if it doesn't allow for, I'll say, non-traditional, and not lowering standard non-traditional, but folks coming from other sectors to get in, then you're just doing yourself a disservice.
And so I'll just add to that. So we realize that the educator shortage is being felt across the country, and that instructors can almost cherry pick institutions in which to work. And that's the same for industry, right? Those people that are working in industry can go anywhere and work at this time, or either come to the collegiate side. And so what we're trying to do is to create a CTE Educator Institute that's designed to recruit, prepare, retain, and train CTE faculty. Not just faculty, but also instructional support personnel and administrators from across the state. So one of the first things that we've done is to try and recruit and enroll faculty candidates from two pools. One from individuals who became certified through alternative routes, and then also individuals who are retiring from industry with credentials. And so once we get those individuals who are retiring from industry, we get them into this institute. We want to help them develop a pedagogy and instructional technology technology curriculum so that they're able to transition from industry into the world of academia. Right. And so part of that also includes making sure that we foster a mentee and mentor relationship for those participants so that they can gain the support that they need, so that they can gain additional knowledge and skills, but then also making sure that we're working with groups such as SACS to make sure that we're credentialing participants so that we meet all of the requirements for accreditation. One of the last things that we're doing is trying to help bridge CTE faculty, particularly those who may come from industry, with other professional development opportunities that we offer throughout our state, at our board office and other state agencies such as the Louisiana Workforce Commission, the Louisiana Department of Education, our Board of Regents. Anytime there's an opportunity for people to gain additional knowledge and understanding of career and technical education, of post-secondary, we want to share that out with them.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. We have another question that talks about, they want us to elaborate more on the concept of teachers that look like students. Is it only skin color that we're talking about, or how much weight can be based on coming from the same or similar backgrounds or communities as our students? Thoughts on this comment from our audience?
So I would, there's so many different ways to get at this question. So first, the research is relatively new. And again, I would point people to Travis Bristol and Conroy Gift's work. I would point them to Dan Goldhaber's work. There's a lot of good stuff out there that shows that teachers of color tend to have a more positive impact on students of color than not. But we also know that white teachers can positively affect students of color if they do certain things, right? And then, high expectations, feeling valued, making sure there's supports, high expectations, right? And then we know that all the institutional racism and systemic racism that exists in American public schools. American public schools are the ranking and sorting mechanism for American society and have done a really good job of oppressing many and privileging few by design, right? And I won't go into, and we have to look at those institutional issues that have always existed in American public education, separate out from it the amazing individual teachers that have done great, of all different backgrounds, that have done a great job by kids, and then look at the fact that the recent research is clearly showing that teachers of color tend to serve kids of color better than many white teachers do. And again, as I said earlier, when you say things like this and you put it out there, it can cause a lot of emotions. It can make people feel uncomfortable. It can cause people to say, but wait a second, I did a great job by my kids, and so I know I can teach kids at a high level. And so we have to keep all these ideas in our heads at once. What kids like the most, and I'll stop at this, at least in my experience, kids like authenticity the most, right? They want to know that that person cares about them, has high expectations, and is a real person and values them as a person. And that's like the most important thing to be a great educator, and people of all different backgrounds can do that. And we know what the impact has been on way too many kids of color in our current public institutions, and then some of the more recent research. So there's never one easy answer, no pun intended, but it's never black and white, right? Like you gotta tease out all the different factors that go into making a great school and helping an educator work at a really high level. And it's never just, you can never say there's just one thing that's gonna turn it around. So that's how I would come at it.
Dr. Williams, I don't know if you want to comment. I do have another question for you.
Yes, I just want to make a comment. One of the things that I'm really excited about in Louisiana is that our system office has a 8-year strategic plan that says we're going to educate 330,000 individuals by 2030, and making sure that they earn 150% above the average income. That doesn't mean a whole lot until you look at it through an equity lens. And one of the things that they have suggested is that every college look at their individual, unique landscape and identify those gaps. So whether it's in races, ethnicities, nationalities, economic statuses, religious backgrounds, gender, sexual orientations, each individual institution has the opportunity to dive deeper into their data, to identify where they can help those students see themselves and recruit from those groups of individuals. And so I just had to share that when we talked about it. Equity and diversity exists outside of race and ethnicity. It exists outside of gender, but each individual institution and agency needs to identify what those things include, what those categories are, and keep those in mind as you move forward, as you plan, as you create these strategic opportunities for your students.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I do have another question for you. How does the Louisiana schools and districts get involved with the CTE Instructor Institute that you described?
So yes, we will be rolling that out late spring. You can email me for information, but we will also be sharing that information out on our website and all of our social media platforms, which is why I shared that information. Just look for #GoLCTCS.
Thank you, and we'll share those resources too with the audience after the webinar concludes. We have another question, and I think this is one that both panelists can answer. We'll go with Dr. Starr first and then Dr. Williams next. But as you look at this issue, there's so many different areas that you can focus on. We talked about licensure, we talked about access to the pipeline, certainly recruitment, placement, and retention. What is one policy or practice that you, if you had a magic wand, would change instantly? And we'll start with Dr. Starr in the system.
I would first start by engaging with and understanding the employees. Notice I said employees and educators of color that I have in my system. So I spent 10 years as a superintendent of schools. In my last district, we did an employee engagement survey. And it's a very simple way to understand whether folks are engaged, because there's a direct relationship between productivity and engagement. And engagement means, like, not that you come to do your job every day, but you're really, you feel that the organization values you and you feel like it's part of, who you are and what you do, right? So then you look at those numbers and you look at it by demographics, and you see, in a school where it's obvious what you do, right? I won't go too far. So, and then if you don't have the numbers that you want, you say, what's going on, right? Let me actually talk to my employees of color and understand whether or not they feel valued, respected, that they're getting opportunities. So, because we're not going to be able to introduce more people into the profession, into our schools, if you don't have a great organization to begin with. And it becomes this sort of like self-perpetuating cycle, right? That if you have a great organization that's very diverse, the people, then all of a sudden more people want to come into it. So I would start first with who's right in front of you, and engaging there. If you don't have any employees of color in your organization, which unfortunately many don't, then you got to take a really hard look at what, why that is, right? And try to get some perceptual data from folks about why they may not want to come work for you. But I would first tap into those who are closest to you to see what the deal is before you start just trying to bring other people in, because you'll lose them if you don't treat them well.
Thank you. Dr. Williams?
For me, I would change a practice within our state. I'd like to implement a CTE program pipeline. So where feasible and applicable, allow graduates from our CTE programs to join the educator community. One of the things I realized, and I experienced this myself, while I was working at the local community college, we needed a lab manager for one of our CTE programs. And so the college hired not just a former graduate, but an individual who was non-traditional in their field. And so this lab manager ended up serving in an expanded capacity as a teacher, a coach, a counselor, a mentor, a strategist, a guide, a facilitator. Anything that those students needed, that lab manager provided. And so students gravitated toward her because she represented who they were. They could see themselves in her. So if it was a way for us to create a practice where, you know, 1 or 2 students, once they graduate, have the opportunity to teach, if you will, at our institutions for a year or 2 years, allow them that opportunity. I would also say I could recommend earmarking more state funds for educator compensation, but that's a topic for another policy session.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. We have another question from the audience. And I think either of you can answer this as well, but let me read it to you. How do you balance the need to fill positions during the Great Resignation and ensuring high quality candidates make it to the classroom? This is from Harold Chapman. Here in Illinois, industry experts are given a pathway to teaching without formal training. Curious of your approach. Dr. Williams, you're on mute.
I was saying that's quite interesting. So if I could reiterate what the question is, just trying to find out how do we get people from industry into the classroom without going through a lot of the red tape, if you will, because it seems like that's what the person did. I think for me is making sure that we're focusing on placement, and we're focusing on recruitment strategies and retention, I'm sorry, not recruitment, but retention strategies. And so I will tell you, my background is organizational communication, leadership, and culture. So people leave organizations not because of the job duties or the workload, they leave organizations because of the leadership. And so a lot of the current research out there suggests that teachers of color are more likely to be placed in institutions where they have weak organizational conditions, poor leadership, and difficult working conditions. So let's break that cycle. Let's consider implementing high quality professional learning communities that foster collaboration, support, mentorship, and leadership for participants. I think it will positively impact retention and satisfaction, and it'll create cultures where people are actually happy and ready to come to work.
So if I understand the question correctly, it's this issue, this tension between needing to fill positions, right, with the Great Resignation, which the numbers, by the way, there's a lot of debate about those numbers out there. It's a little bit of a side note, but with that and quality. So I building on what Dr. Williams said, you know, there's we spend way too much time in education in general focused on the education of future teachers before they get into schools. There's Dick Elmore used to call the 0% depreciation model in public education, that we expect people to come in with 100% of knowledge and skills, and then they depreciate over time because schools don't do a really good job around adult learning. So while I certainly don't want people coming in unprepared, there's also, we need to do a heck of a lot more to engage our educators in leading their own learning, right? The best schools do that. The best principals do that. So, you know, and you can create systems around that. You know, superintendents and school boards can support that. So yes, it is a real problem if we're just taking anybody off the street. I'm not advocating for that at all. And we need to do a lot more to organize systems for adult learning. You know, we don't have a student learning problem in America. We have an adult learning problem. Kids know how to learn. They're going to learn what they're being taught. But we have an adult learning problem. We don't organize our schools and our school systems to be about adults leading their learning. And the more we do that, the better off instruction is going to be for all kids, and the better off student achievement is going to be. So even if we change the bar for entry, which again, I'm not advocating for, but that could be a reality, nothing should be preventing schools and districts from investing heavily in ongoing professional learning that's collaborative, that's standards driven, and that's being led by the adults themselves, because educators need to lead their own learning.
Thank you, Dr. Starr. So we'll take one final question, and I'll ask both of you this. I think we've talked a lot about what can happen across the spectrum from states to districts. What is maybe one short-term solution that you would recommend state leaders to take immediately to address this issue? And I'll start with Dr. Starr, and then we'll go to Dr. Williams.
Make sure there's an Educators Rising program in every single district and school, right? No, I think that the two things. One is to set up a commission with real power that can take a hard look at the licensure, all the technical stuff, right? And really make some changes to licensure and certification and things like that. The other side is we need to incentivize, right? I mean, it's raising pay, it's dual enrollment, it's whatever needs to be done on the incentive side. So we're going to put some actual money and power behind incentivizing people to pursue the profession and to be in the profession. I think those two can help.
So I'll just add on to that. I think there are three things that state leaders need to do. Number one, they need to look at their data. Number two, they need to look at their partners. And number three, they need to modify whatever current professional development or trainings they currently offer. I know for us, like I shared, we have our diversity dashboard that we're using, but it wasn't until we actually started diving into the data that we saw that our CTE faculty was only 26% of our overall instructional pool. And then of that 26%, they did not mirror what our students look like. And so then we were able to go back to our PR department and say, how can we do more targeted marketing? How can we expend funds so that we're reaching those underrepresented instructors, that we're focusing on discipline-specific campaigns, and that we're promoting the successes of our high-quality CTE programs? And then the second thing that we tried to do is make sure that we were speaking with our partners. So we have relationships with our workforce commission, our workforce development boards. And what we try to do is share any educator vacancies that we have with them, and they share it within their networks. Remember, in Louisiana, we're looking at those individuals who are retiring from industry to come and work for us. But we're also meeting with our business and industry partners to see who wants to be an adjunct in our classroom. How can we get you into the pipeline? And then once you're in, we know that we can keep you, right? We're going to offer everything that you need. We're going to do professional development. We're working on some of those incentives, those financial incentives to keep you there. But we're also expanding too and exploring partnerships with teacher education programs. There's a doctoral scholars program through the Southern Regional Education Board. And so SREB's program prepares minority PhD candidates who have a desire to teach in academia. And so the program provides them with layered support, mentoring, career counseling, and professional development. And so we want to tap into them with that partnership, right? Can we get them in, get those teachers into our classroom? And then the last thing is just expanding that professional development, making sure that we're including training on pedagogy, classroom management, micromanaging, anything that they would need in the classroom. But we also have instructors who have a desire to progress beyond the classroom into administration, right? So our professional development training has to build the capacity for these diverse educators to continue the cycle of refilling the pipeline, if you will.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I want to just take a moment to thank both of our awesome panelists, Dr. Starr and Dr. Williams. Excellent comments, excellent suggestions. For our audience, we will be sharing their PowerPoints. We'll post that on our Advanced CTE website. I want to just thank everyone again for joining us today for this Advanced CTE webinar. After leaving this meeting, please complete the quick evaluation that will pop up in your window and your web browser. We want to make sure that this series is really meeting your needs, so your feedback is invaluable to us. As mentioned, a recording of this call will be posted to the Advanced CTE website and our YouTube channel for your reference. And in order to diversify the post-secondary state CTE leadership pipeline, Advanced CTE is accepting applications for the 2022-2023 cohort of the Post-Secondary State CTE Leaders Fellowship at Advanced CTE, so which is sponsored by our ECMC Foundation. Please visit the link in the chat to review the frequently asked questions and register for the information session that's coming up about this application. So very timely. We want to continue building our workforce, our leaders, and diversifying the pipeline and talent pool. So thank you again to our panelists. One other thing I'll mention is please connect with Dr. Starr and Dr. Williams. They did share their contact information. We posted it in the chat. We'll share it with you. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out with us. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.